Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 goats to have ever goated, the one that they call Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm a bit dizzy this morning, Cam. I find those races in Austria, they're just a blur. The lap is so short. There are so few corners. It's all crash, bang, wallop. And yeah, I get a bit giddy watching it already, but I'm okay now. I think my head was spinning for a while, but it's all right now.
It was an interesting race
Well, yeah,
weekend.
it always is in Austria, isn't it? There's
It,
always going to be some drama or
it,
two or three.
or four or five,
Yeah.
as is customary. Then, Mr. Windsor, what do you make? What, in your humble opinion, was the biggest story to come out of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend?
Red Bull's performance across the board, really. Not only the Max race and his recovery from that shunt in qualifying, but that in itself was stand out in terms of the season so far. Red Bull, you could almost say Red Bull are back. Really, really good drive by Max, brilliant performance by the team. The car was very good on tyre deg. It was good everywhere, really. Yeah, Max, again, not happy with every aspect of the car, but who was? We even had Kimi saying the brakes were not very good, long pedal and so forth. So that was it. Beyond that, Isaac Hadjar backed all that up with an excellent drive as well. So reliability is there as well. So in terms of all the balls have had to juggle at Red Bull in the last 6 months, excellent performance. And then of course Red Bull Powertrain Ford, not a bad engine. We've got both Racing Bulls in the points as well. So there you got four of those engines, all rock solid, reliable, and quick. I thought that was, in terms of the season, if we look back at this season, I think that's where we will think, wow, Red Bull starting to dance with the music again.
It feels like is it a little bit too little, too late though, Peter? If you're talking about keeping a fire-breathing dragon in Maximilian Verstappen, I mean, where is he in the champion? Seventh or eighth in the championship, and his manager says that Max wasn't born to compete in the carbon fibre zone. That he should be winning races. Is it now going in? I mean, a couple of weeks away from the summer break. Is it a little bit too little, too late?
No, I don't think so. I don't think in terms of the championship any more than a lot of people do until you get to the last third of the season, probably the last quarter of the season. And right now, I mean, if Max doesn't win the championship, and he probably won't, Mercedes for sure have got the best car over a year still. But he could well, if Max ends the year have with, say, I don't know, 4 or 5 wins under his belt, are we going to think it's a terrible year for Max Verstappen and Red Bull? No, we're not. We're going to say, wow, what a great thing. So I think you have to see it in that context. And points aren't everything. I think Sterling Moss made that pretty clear whenever he was asked about the authenticity of the World Championship and how much that should be used as a gauge for judgment. Sterling, one of the greatest Grand Prix drivers of all time, never won the World Championship. End of story. Thank you very much. Let's move on.
Very well said. But Max will, at the very least, be looking to win races. And I mean, he's got the winningest, if that's a word that exists, the winningest record around Austria. Brilliant performance from Max. I just can't help but feel like his time's done over there at the Bulls that are red, Peter. I feel like it's come to a natural conclusion.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, if Max was in a Mercedes right now, everyone would be talking about, presumably, be there instead of Kimi, actually, because if Toto had hired him last year for this year, whatever contracts needed to be paid off and done it, I think he probably would have put him in the Kimi seat, I guess. I don't know. It's an interesting point. But assuming he was there at Mercedes, yeah, you'd be saying, wow, Max Verstappen, another world championship coming up. But he's not there. And where else do you want him to be? There's nowhere else he can be. He might as well make the most of where he is. And as I say, so long as Red Bull are doing a pretty good job, and they're doing a better job than McLaren right now, which is saying something. They're probably doing a better job than Ferrari right now, which is saying something. So give them credit for where they are and what they've achieved and how difficult it's been post Adrian Newey. And they're doing the job. I said, the real litmus test on how Red Bull are going to survive in the post Newey era is right now. It started basically in Austria. And if they keep this up over the next 2 or 3 races, then we know that whatever magic they've now got at Red Bull, it's working pretty well. And all credit to Laurent Mekies, probably very, very good people person, I would imagine, seems to be. And people like Paul Chucker Moynihan who've been there through thick and thin, still there and still doing a great job. Not the only one, of course, but there's a lot of good people at Red Bull still, and we shouldn't forget that. And don't forget also how quick people were to malign the Red Bull Powertrain Ford project and to trash it before it had even moved a piston. And look, what are they saying now? What are those people now saying? Actually, they've just gone quiet. This is the thing about the internet, isn't it? And maybe it's not just the internet; it's probably TV in general. But when things don't quite work out how they expected, the cognoscenti expected, as Murray Walker would phrase it, then they go quiet. A bit like Max after the whole treaded tire thing, still waiting for the apology from the FIA for putting us on the treaded tires.
It's interesting that you
Max Mosley, that is, not Max Verstappen.
It's interesting, Peter, that you cite Paul Monahan, because it feels like he might be the last of the Mohicans about to leave potentially to go and join Cadillac F1. No more Paul. No more Rob Marshall, no more Newey, no more Christian Horner, no more Giampiero Lambiase.
Well, I didn't know that about Paul. If that's the case, I think that is a bit of a loss for Red Bull, and I can't imagine why he's doing that. I mean, it can only be a more senior position, I would imagine, and more money, which this stage of his career in life, I guess, it'll be quite difficult for him to turn down. But having said that, if Cadillac need anybody, they need somebody like Paul Moynihan, don't they? To come in and crack the whip.
Yeah, he's not a bad F1 mind. Let's talk about the crash, Peter, because I saw that Max Verstappen crash and I smelt a rat instantaneously. It didn't look like a typical Max Verstappen crash. And then shortly thereafter, Lauren Matthews comes out and says, we owe Max Verstappen an apology because he lost himself material aero at the rear going through that super quick corner. What do you make of that, Peter? That feels a little bit, not necessarily, it's not incompetence, is it? But again, I agree with you that Red Bull are worthy of a lot of praise, brand new power unit program, etc. But how can a team as good as Red Bull have been have Max Verstappen going through the highest minimum speed turn on the track, and then all of a sudden the aero just goes, see you later, out of office?
Because it's still not a great racing car. It's pretty good. It's much better than it's been, but it's not a Mercedes. And if there was an arrow part fell off the car just before that corner or on that lap, that is a function of the car having to be driven on the absolute limit by a guy like Max Verstappen from day one. And if an arrow part's come off the car, it's probably because he's hit a curb. Maybe it's slightly the wrong angle, slightly the wrong impact level. And that's done the damage. And if it's a part that's just come off of its own volition, that's a function of having to put so many upgrades on the car because of the situation in which they've found themselves. But that shouldn't detract from the progress they've made. And so in answer to your question, it's kind of understandable. I can't think of a Grand Prix team in the world which is bulletproof in terms of parts performing exactly as they should all the time. And believe me, they're everywhere. Mercedes, you'll find these things going on all the time. We don't always get to hear about them, but definitely, So, yeah, I don't think that's in any way out of context. And I think it's, it just shows the limits that everybody's working to and driving to and running to at Red Bull. And it wasn't a Max Verstappen era because it wasn't an oversteer, understeer, wasn't anything. It was just complete loss of grip, basically. And I still maintain the ultimate issue there, as it had been throughout the weekend in terms of Sector 3, is that Red Bull were getting more out of their tyres, using their tyres more in order to be as quick as they were through Sectors 1 and 2, particularly Sector 2. So whenever Max got to Sector 3, the tyres were hot, and we're talking about one lap now on a soft set, new set, and then they gave up. That was ultimately the real issue. They're never going to say that in print. And I suppose it sounds more plausible if you don't want Max to take any of the blame, which I presume is why they said that in the first place, which is fair enough. I don't think they need to say that, though. Anybody that knows anything about racing knows that wasn't Max's fault. Well, it wasn't a driving error in the normal sense of the word. Of course, it was his fault in the sense that if he'd been going slower, he wouldn't have gone off. So in that sense, yes, okay, it was his fault. But the point I'm trying to make is that if he's putting out a quote that's deflecting anything that's heading in Max's direction, I suppose that's as smooth a way of doing it as any other, But we've seen plenty of cars lose aero bits and not actually slow down very much, even Red Bulls, actually. So for me, it was more of a tyre thing, which engendered probably, a bit of aero damage at the back because of the way the thing had to be driven, which inevitably led to what we saw. That was just when I saw him going off, I just thought, wow, now we know how much on the limit Max Verstappen is in that car. And that's because how many drivers you see in that situation? Not many. Not many. I can't really think of any, actually, apart from Stefan when he had the shunt with the deer, of course.
Oof. We'll get onto that, Peter. I just want to ask you. I want to ask you a very quick strategic question pertaining to Max, because I see that with 29 laps left, the gap between your race lead in George and Max in second was now less than 1 second. And Red Bull decided they need this tyre offset and leave Max out. Did they make a wrong decision? A potentially race victory costing decision by leaving Max out and investing wholeheartedly in this tyre offset that some might say they didn't even need, because they went on shortly thereafter to put Max Verstappen on the very same hard compound tyre that George was on.
Yeah, but newer. And I don't think, to start, what are they looking for? A set of softs at the end?
So he had a set of mediums. I presumed that's what he was going on, but he didn't like them apparently. Yeah,
exactly. And to me, the hard tyre was the right tyre. I didn't see anything wrong with their strategy at all. I thought it was exactly right. He was in a position where he had a little bit more life in the tyres compared with George, not as much as Kimi, but it was a significant difference. And it was the same difference actually between Charles and Lewis, 7 laps, I think. And look how much quicker Lewis was in that situation. Or was it the McLarens? I think it was Charles to Lewis. And I think that was the right call. Don't forget, that's not as if they've been almost winning races this year. Their job ultimately is to think, how can we finish second in this race? Maybe we're going to luck into a win here. We'll put some pressure on George. But ultimately, we're not going to take any decisions that might come under the heading of, being right on the edge of will it work or not. It had to be relatively conservative. And I think they did exactly the right thing at that point. Exactly the right thing. And it was the right strategy, in my opinion. And Max Verstappen finished second, splitting the 2 Mercs. It's not a bad result if you think about it. How much would you have put on if somebody had said to you in Miami, let's say China, okay, how much? Here's a bet. Max Verstappen is going to finish second in the Austrian Grand Prix between the 2 Mercs. What would you have said?
No chance that you're
exactly.
Smoking something very strong.
I think let sleeping dogs lie there. I think they made a good call.
Fair. Good shout. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let's talk about qualifying, because a lot's been made about...
I thought you were going to talk about Kimi and the VSC and Carlos Sainz.
We'll get to...
Was that further on? Okay, all right. Yeah, we're taking a step backwards now into qualifying.
Okay. All under the umbrella heading of qualifying first.
Yeah.
Me and you disagree on this George Russell thing. I think, Peter, that many have said that George was crafty, that he exercised the sort of devil that you would associate with the greatest champions like a Michael and an Ayrton, in understanding that this is almost case law that the FIA operate under, that it's precedent. And so you're looking at Carlos Sainz at Mexico a couple of years ago, and if there is
what happened with Carlos in Mexico?
So Carlos, go on then. There's a couple of different examples. So Carlos, I think, eased off, single yellow. Eased off, did the old karting thing and waved his hand. I see that there is danger. Eased off ever so slightly.
But what was the danger?
And completed. Peter, you're asking me questions.
Exactly. And from memory, Mexico's flat, isn't it? Anyway, let's move on. I'll be making that point in a second.
Fair. So I think George played. I think George played a blinder. I understand that safety is paramount, and this is F1. And people have lost their lives, and that should always be. We have every conversation in F1 under that aegis, but I don't think, for me, I can't hold George Russell responsible for the sins of the FIA. Right? If it's a single yellow, the president is to ease off a little bit, be prepared for a cheeky direction change if indeed you need to, but then you don't necessarily need to abandon the lap as if you'd need to do if it were double waved yellow. How do you characterise this, Peter? Was George behaving badly by completing the lap, do you think?
Well, I don't think he completed the lap because the lap never went away. So he just drove the lap is my first reaction to that. And I think any comparisons between his lift on that lap and any other laps are spurious because he's in a lift and coast position anyway there. And you can compare it to the previous quickest lap. But did you compare it with, I don't know, his third quickest lap on a Friday, for example, where he lifts there? So that's the first thing. I think that whole lifting thing is moot and not really something that any of us can judge because it needs to be seen in a total context, not just in the previous lap. First point. Second point, the cheeky change of direction that you mention is a very gray phrase, is it not? It can be a number of things. It could be, oh, I see the car's on the left, so I'm going to move a little bit to the right, and I'm just going to make sure I don't get a puncture and miss all the debris. It could also mean there's a wild animal on the circuit. I need to be able to do a double S bend here. And am I going slow enough to be able to do that, to miss this running animal in front of me? It could mean that. That's change of direction. And I say that not to be disingenuous. I say that because it's exactly what we've had in that corner before. We've had a running deer in that corner. And at that point, and I come back to your reference to Carlos in Mexico.
Sorry, Carlos in Qatar, I misspeak. Carlos
Qatar, okay, well, same thing, flat track, sea level. So I come back to that point, and Mexico and Qatar, the visibility is pretty good. Even at the speed at which they're traveling, you got a rough idea as you're approaching 200 meters before exactly what's going on. This was not the case on this corner. It was a blind brow, very fast, going down to a downhill plunging right-hander, the Joch and Rindt curve. And I would defy anyone to say to me that as he went over that blind brow, lift or no lift, that George Russell would have been in a position to have done a sudden change of direction if there'd been a wild animal running across the track at the speed he was going. And I would go further and say that if there were no lights at all, no flags, and Max just went off, let's say there was a complete breakdown in the circuit electronic system, and George came over that brow and he saw dust and stuff everywhere on the left-hand side of the track and a car crashing or just having crashed, and Max is still getting out of the car or still in the car. Do you not think that he would have braked?
You're asking Peter.
Because I think the reaction Kimi Antonelli had was, whoa, this is a big shunt. Whoa, oh, it's a yellow there, and brake. That was Kimi's reaction, which is totally correct and totally natural. Now, George didn't do that. George thought, yellow, yeah, lift, go, bang, get the pole. That's what George thought. I give him credit for that. That is unbelievably quick thinking. And to be able to judge that it's a single yellow, not a double, at the speed he's going and at the impact of the shunt that Max has just had. And it doesn't matter what angle he hits the guardrail or the fence. You know that if you go off there, it's a big one because it's a quick corner. Then you got to say, yeah, of course, George was absolutely under the radar in everything that he did there, and he got away with it. But I don't think that's very clever. And I don't think if he's got a teammate in the same car who's gone through the corner just before him, who's braking and slowing the car considerably so that he can change a direction if he needs to, I don't put that under the head of being clever. I just put it under the heading of he got away with it. And I would still like to look George in the eye and say, so you're telling me that when you went over that brow, if there'd been a deer right in front of you, you would have been going slowly enough to avoid it. And he didn't know. Nobody knew. Nobody knew in the garage what had happened at that point.
Yeah. No, you make a point.
So that's the point. Now, and if the regs as they're written don't cover all those variables that I've just talked about, rewrite the rules right now, because it can happen again. Yeah. It's not the only. I mean, Spa is another circuit with undulations, and all this thing about you got to slow down 5% or whatever, come off the throttle. That works on some places, on some circuits, on some corners. It doesn't work on all corners in all conditions. Let's talk about the wet now as another example.
Yeah.
And Pouon, good example. Pouon in the wet at Spa.
Oof.
Somebody goes off, hits the guardrail hard, and for a 15-second period, they put out a single yellow, and then it immediately goes to double. And at that point, George is just going through, and there's stuff all over the track, and it's only a single yellow, and he gets a massive puncture and goes off. You know,
That's a,
it's completely wrong, in my opinion. Just to finish this, when it is a question of you say, it's all part of our DNA to be aware that people can get hurt in Formula One, and when it's safety, you have to take it very seriously. But that's exactly what didn't happen. George is a big light in the GPDA, and in theory, the GPDA are as much concerned about safety as they are anything else. And yet, in a situation where it could have gone perilously wrong, he just went for the absolute cleanest possible option of not backing off, which to me is the wrong mentality completely. And it will come back to bite you. You've got to have when it's safety, you've got to go to the other extreme, which is, not going to play with anything here. Lots of margin for error, please, because you just don't know, especially if it's a blind brow, and especially if you're doing 300 kilometers an hour. That's my point, and I stand by it.
It's a great point, Peter, and it's very well made. I just feel like that's more FIA and the marshal's responsibility. Then George has to take some culpability in that, but ultimately, if you are an F1 driver, I want to leverage the infamous Ayrton Senna quote, right? If you no longer got to go for the gap, then you are no longer a racing driver, and this is similar to that, isn't it? That George is a hardwired racing driver. As soon as he sees and identifies that it's single yellows, he's going to want to complete the lap, because the race weekend and the 25 points and potentially the championship down the road might depend on it. I argue, Peter, that Kimi, had he had his Weetabix that morning, probably would have done the same thing, because he confessed his sins afterwards and said, I thought I saw a double waved yellow. It was not, it was a single waved, which meant that the only necessary action was a cheeky, as Sainz did in 2021 Qatar, as Max didn't in Mexico 2019, and ultimately got his lap ruled out. It's a very different way that the FIA demand that you need to behave under single yellows as versus doubles. Doubles, you must not, the rule that you read out, Article B18.4 A and B, double wave dictates that you must not attempt a meaningful lap time in qualifying. The lap time will be automatically deleted. So if it's a double wave, I'd agree with you. That's exactly what George needs to do, he needs to get out. But having the wherewithal, the kind of championship mentality and mindset to see, okay, this is single yellow, not double yellow. Hopefully Max is fine and the FIA haven't made a mistake. I can feather the throttle ever so slightly and get back in it. Green flag, let's go. I think George is worthy of a little bit of credit for that, Peter, no?
No, I don't think so, because he is in a position to know how fallible the FIA are. And we've seen so many mistakes from the FIA. Going back, I mean, I don't know where you want to go back to, but let's go back to Gilles Bianchi. Oh. When obviously there was a massive increase in the way we approach safety and the protocol of safety and vehicles on the track and so forth. If you want to go back to that point, we've seen a number of FIA shortcomings and misunderstandings and mistakes. And if you want to project that beyond safety and you want to go to technology and you want to go to pit lane speeding, or you want to go to start procedures or scrutineering errors, whatever it is, the FIA are definitely fallible. And it's no surprise, because they're trying to police an incredibly difficult, complicated, very competitive, highly financed sport. An impossibility, really, to do it perfectly. So when it's safety, you build in a margin for error. And that margin for error doesn't necessarily have to mix and have to be a straitjacket approach to every situation with a yellow or a double yellow. It has to be taken in accordance to the variables of the circuit on which you're driving. And I repeat my point. It's one thing to be going down a long straight at Qatar, and at turn one, there's some sort of incident and it's a single yellow, and you can see 200 or 300 meters before exactly what's happened, and the marshals are already helping Lando out of the car, or whatever it is, and he's jumping over the fence. That's one thing. It's quite another over a blind brow at 300 kilometers an hour into a plunging downhill right-hander. That is my point. And I think you understand it. I don't imagine anybody else does, because the FIA, I'm sure, will make no changes to the wording of that regulation. I'd have a lot more respect for George if this morning he said, I don't know if he is still president of the GPDA, I have no idea, but assuming he still is, if he said, look, I'm president of the GPDA, I do care about safety. I was clever and I got away with it and I got the pole, and Kimi, we know, thought it was a double yellow and he braked and he started P4 and I won the race and I'm very happy about it. But I do think that Austria showed that we've got to rewrite these rules and we've got to make them much clearer, because I went through on the basis that it was a single yellow. All I needed to do was lift, and I went through and I got the pole. And that's wrong quite clearly, because I know everybody out there knows that it could have been much worse than it was. And I could have hurt myself, or I could have hurt somebody else or an animal. And I think I'm calling now for that rule to be changed, and it needs to be a lot more accurate in terms of the types of corner involved and the speeds involved. If he said that, I'd have a lot more respect for him. But this whole business of, oh, George is really clever, he's thinking about the points in the championship. Yeah, he is clever and he's thinking about the points in the championship. And if Kimi wakes up this morning, I'm sure he'll think the same way. He'll think, oh yeah, if only I'd done that, I would have been on the pole, I would have won the race, had a great car, better balance than George, better on time management. Of course he's going to say that. But the reality is he braked, and that was part of Kimi's makeup, I think. It's easy to say I thought it was double yellow. I'll tell you why he thought it was double yellow, because it was a big shunt and it was 300 kilometers an hour. That's why he thought it was double yellow. Because why wouldn't it be double yellow? At least, it should have been more than that. It should have been an instant red, as we all know. And so, it's a psychological thing, isn't it? And if George has got the clarity of thought to think, oh, they've made a mistake, they've put out the single, for sure it's going to be double in a second or two, that's wrong. That's completely wrong in my view, because he doesn't know what's happening over that brow. He doesn't know. And that, this is a Red Bull fever circuit. How does he know some marshal wouldn't have been jumping over the fence to get to the beloved Max Verstappen? How does he know there wasn't, I keep making the point, wasn't some animal roaming around the track? How does he know these things?
He doesn't.
And so I'm afraid none of the comments you've made, I agree with, Cameron, because safety is a different question to everything else, and you have to use your brain. And if you go right back to the start of it all, if it wasn't for Jackie Stewart, a lot of drivers would have lost their lives and been seriously injured over the last 50 years, 40 years in Formula One. And I was around in the days when, and don't switch off here because this is very important. I was around in the days when Jackie called on the other drivers to boycott a race for reasons that they were quite able to say, well, we've raced in these conditions before. What's the difference? Nobody got hurt then. Everything was normal. We don't have to boycott the race. I mean, just because a few bolts are loose in the Armco, it's not that big a deal. We've seen this before. But Jackie said, no, if we don't do it now, things will never get changed. And that's why I say the best thing George could do this morning is to say, as president of the GPDA, we need to relook at the single double yellow thing, because it's completely wrong. And I was lucky to get away with it in Austria. Bang. I shouldn't be able to get away with that again. That's what George should be saying. And guess what? He'd be a hero, I think, if he said that. But I don't believe he will. But that's what I think he should be doing.
Very good points, Mr. Windsor. Super pertinent and super important, and very well made and landed. To George Russell and the championship, there was a lot of chatter on the broadcast about the Russell reset, that it was always going to go better as versus his teammate Kimi Antonelli as we encroach upon the European leg of the season. Is that what we're seeing now, Peter, going into Silverstone? That George being a smoother Jenson Button style driver, that potentially he's almost his style means that he'll go quicker and better and start to re-establish a dominance over his sophomore teammate in Kimi Antonelli?
No, I don't think we're seeing that at all. I can't imagine anybody saying that, actually, because it doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think the only thing that makes sense to me is Barcelona. There's no way George was ever going to be as good as Kimi around Barcelona. Austria, he should be able to be right up there with Kimi, if not slightly ahead of him, because it's a sort of fairly boring circuit with not many technical corners, not much you can do. The Merc's going to fly there. He's going to be within 100th of a second of Kimi around there. And guess what? He wasn't. He was actually blown away by Kimi. Kimi was going to get the pole. Kimi was better on his tires in the race. And Kimi was just outstandingly good around Austria. So if anything, you'd now say, poof, George is going to have to put in the perfect lap in order to beat Kimi at Silverstone, and drive the perfect race in order to beat, and have a few things go in his favor. And, the only way he beat Kimi in Austria was by what we've just been talking about, by getting a spurious pole, in my opinion, and Kimi starting fourth with having to pass the two Ferraris. And that's how he got it. So I think, to say, Jenson Button style, what does that mean? He's going to be even slower because he's not going to be very good on flick oversteer at high speed now. I mean, that's one thing George is quite good at. Jenson was useless at that. That's why he was always pathetic at Silverstone. So, I don't see the comparison at all there. And if you look to them on track, I mean, George is definitely spikier than Kimi with all his inputs, steering, throttle, everything, brakes. And he's definitely using wider corners, he's got a longer lap to drive as a result. His straights are shorter. He doesn't do anything as well as Kimi, as far as I can see right now, apart from, make snap judgments about single and double yellows.
Respectfully, Mr. Windsor, can I?
And I'm, and look back through my videos. I'm a big George fan. I always have been. Always have been a George fan for what he is. But I don't think he's ever developed beyond being the driver that he is now in terms of his style. He's never ever going to be, I don't think, because he would have done it if he was, a shorter corner driver like Kimi. And I always said from day one, if Kimi can take what he does on slow corners and project that through medium and high speed corners and change the direction, he's going to beat George. Always said that, and that's exactly what's happening.
Can I counter respectfully, Peter? Because here's how I understand the Kimi Antonelli George Russell dynamic. I agree with you that Kimi absolutely had more pace in hand around the Red Bull ring than did George. 1000%. But isn't the gift of George? I mean, when I was younger, Peter, I always gravitated to the natural talented one, that the flair driver. A Senna or a Lewis or a Lionel Messi. Those were my favourites. But in my old age, as I've become a bit of a grey beard with recession and all, I've I think there's a beauty in a George Russell type that notwithstanding this natural talent deficit as versus his teammate, he has that ability. We talked about it on the channel before, the ability to draw out of himself the best in the moments of import, like that qualifying, the speed. Okay, single yellow flag notwithstanding, the fact that George managed to go so quick in his final lap in Q3, that's noteworthy. Needs to be commended for that, right, Peter? Because again, I don't think if Antonelli and George both do their best hypothetical laps, I think Kimi bests George to 2 or 3 tenths even. Absolutely, he was quicker than. But the fact that George still managed to pull it out, I think that's going to. I suspect, Peter, that might be the story of the championship. That George, or at least the next few races, that George might beat Kimi Antonelli despite being slower than him in absolute terms. Am I onto something? You're talking rubbish, Peter. Tell me I'm barking at the wrong tree.
I don't really understand it. I'm not saying it's rubbish. I don't really understand what you're saying, because Kimi quite clearly was in perfect position for sector 3 because he was actually slightly slower through sectors 1 and 2 than he had been. And so that quite clearly he was getting the tyres perfect for sector 3. And even if you put in his previous best in sector 3, he's only like 1,000th slower than George on that perfect lap, apart from the single yellow in the lift. And so I think Kimi would have been, as you say, 1 or 2 tenths quicker, which is a massive amount around Austria. So I don't really see the point. To me, what you're talking about is, you mentioned the word a certain beauty about it. There's a certain beauty in having a team on which, on one side of the fence, you have a driver who's fairly conventional in his technical approach to corners, who's very, very competitive, very hard to beat, and has a very, very good racing brain, is articulate, and has a solution for everything before you've even opened your mouth, really. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got a young Italian who's got an amazing God-given talent that he's nurturing beautifully, that he's now matching with a fiery competitive instinct and a solid Michael Schumacher, Max Verstappen-like approach to racing and technology and how to get the best from it. So you've got those two extremes. And there is a certain beauty in having those extremes. That's certainly more than McLaren have. They've got two basic drivers who are basically the same, and they go around in circles most of the time. Well, they are now anyway. So yeah, there's a beauty in that, but I don't see a beauty in George's approach per se, because I mean the nearest comparison, if you like, could be 1967. Jim Clark, who's effectively Kimi Antonelli. I'm not saying Kimi's yet Jim Clark. He's not, but he's that ilk of driver. And in the other car, you got Graham Hill, who's a little bit, George Russell. And there was a certain beauty in that. And Jimmy's approach to having Graham in the team was, yeah, Graham's going to be quicker, a few races, no problem. I'll get him when it comes to looking after the tires, making sure I finish the race, all the things that mattered back in 67. And that's a great thing for the team to have those two extremes. And that's about as far as it goes. To me, George Russell is not a Jim Clark. He's not a Sterling Moss. He's not a Michael Schumacher. He's not a Max Verstappen. He's, he's a Ronnie Peterson maybe with a better mental approach to all the variables that are going on. So, and I'm talking about stature now, not style. And that's it. And there's a certain beauty about Ronnie, obviously. There's a certain beauty about George. That's about all I can say. I didn't really understand the rest of it.
I just think beauty is probably not the right word, Peter. I just think there's something to be admired. Of
course, there's something to be admired about all of them, and they all have their own plus points. Even there's something to be admired about Lance Stroll, to be honest, because at least he's out there getting his dad to spend all his money and do this team and keep everybody in work, and and at least Paul Moynihan's not going to Aston. I suppose you can say that, but everybody has their plus points, and George has plenty of plus points. From changing gear ratios in the back of his go-kart in the pouring rain somewhere to potentially winning the world championship this year. And I still think he will win the world championship. And I think that's another point, actually. It is a great thing. But I think the other point is, I think George will win the world championship. And I think therefore he didn't need to do what he did in Austria. That to me is almost a sign of desperation that he did that. That was the way to beat Kimi in Austria. I've got that now, let's move forward. It will be all that. It won't be, what was Rob Wilson's number again? It won't be that. It'll be, I'm going to Silverstone now as the Austrian Grand Prix winner, the crowd, mega. And he could well win Silverstone. He could easily win Silverstone because it's no way he'll be slow there. But to win Silverstone, he's got to beat Kimi. And that won't be easy around Silverstone, I predict.
I think, Peter, George, as skullduggerous and line steppy as the single flag feta throttle movement was from George, I think it's the biggest compliment to Kimi that George has to leave known.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I mean, that's basically a good summation of what I've just been saying.
I think
around Austria too, for Pete's sake. Not as if it's that difficult a circuit in a car like the Mercedes, and he had to do that in order to beat Kimi to the pole. Yeah. And it's that says everything you need to say about Kimi and how good Kimi is. Let's go back to Silverstone though, because George, I mean, will Kimi be as good as George through Beckett's? Maybe not, to be honest. I mean, maybe I'm asking too much of Kimi, or we're asking too much of Kimi. Will he be as good as George through Copse? I mean, he just hasn't driven a Grand Prix car enough around Silverstone, actually, to blow George away on one lap. But over the race distance, tyre management, all that stuff, Kimi's not going to be bad. He's not going to be bad. And, for George to have to resort to what he did I think it could work the other way for him. Unless there are lots of single yellow, double reds, whatever, in every race to come, and George plays it all perfectly.
There will always be a cheeky yellow or cheeky red, but I think there's a pattern emerging, accepted for Mercedes reliability issues, of which they've had a few. Mention no names, Canada, and what's the one before Canada? I can't even remember now, Peter.
I've got it though, Cameron. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Blame Toto for all of this, because wasn't it Toto that said to George, "Just drive the car, George"?
But they said that was Toto. That had been up on the back of a conversation that they'd had.
Yeah, right.
You don't think so?
Of course they'd say that. Yeah.
That Toto's telling George not to overthink it. Just
exactly.
Just drive.
Exactly. But that's right. That's it. So he did. Single yellow. Just lift. Go. I'm driving the car.
Yeah. I think George is going to need to do all of that, Peter.
Well, he needs to make a statement, a public statement about how that rule needs to be changed,
I'd
and
agree.
certainly not changed, but modified drastically. And I don't know what it is, but they need to define what change of direction means, given the nature of the corner and the visibility ahead of you, and the possibility of the marshals stroke the FIA getting it all wrong anyway, which is always, it's a big assumption. I mean, it doesn't matter really if the starting procedure collapses or they get the speed loops wrong at Monaco. It doesn't matter in the overall whirlwind of life, because it's not life-threatening. But when it is life-threatening and you know the FIA are fallible, why would you put your hands on the finger of somebody pressing a button that says single or double? Why would you do that? Doesn't make sense to me when we're talking about surviving and safety on a very high-speed corner. And it wasn't a single or a double. It should have been a red.
It should have been.
Yeah, of course it should have. And so there's the mistake straight away. And George took advantage of the mistake, obviously. When you look at it, that's the only way to look at it. And Kimi didn't. I think Kimi was going slowly enough to be able to make a sudden change of direction. And change of direction doesn't just mean one move. It could mean an S-bend or a double S-bend.
But Peter, can I ask you this? I mean, World Championship winning team manager with Nigel back in 92. What would you have said to Nigel had he been going through there and done what Kimi Antonelli did, misinterpreted what was a single yellow for a double yellow and potentially cost himself 25 points? What would you have said to Nigel had that been?
I would have been speaking to a Nigel who would have stopped the car, got out of the car and run over to see if he could help Max. That's what Nigel would have done.
Fair.
I can tell you that straight away. And, end of story. Of course, you're not allowed to do that today, but that's what he would have done in 1992.
Prosecution rests no further questions. Your Honour, very well said, Peter. Andrea Stella said post-race that Oscar Piastri, that you can attribute his resurgence to a lot of work that they've done back at the factory, that this is his suspension, brand new one, and suspension geometry moment that Lando Norris had this year. What do you make of Oscar Piastri? More pertinently, do you see that McLaren have now turned the corner, Peter?
Well, I think they must. I mean, there's no explanation from Andrea about, what it must have felt like for it not to be wet in Austria, as McLaren had predicted and presumably hoped. They're desperate to get those intermediates on the car when it's on the grid. Didn't work in Canada. I think they were hoping for rain. It probably explains why they weren't very good in Austria. And I think what we're really looking at there, in all seriousness, is not Oscar going well, Oscar having a pretty boring, slow race, and Lando going really slowly and not having a good weekend at all. A very good Friday, and it just sort of fell away. I know he didn't do many laps, but he looked like he was really going well on Friday when he was out, and he recovered very quickly from a late start, and just faded away. And yeah, I don't know if that's the big improvement for Oscar. Then he's going to be struggling to be racing with the Ferraris on some circuits by the look of it. We're talking about, it's in the context that McLaren should be out there racing with Mercedes. That's what we expect of them, and they're a long way from there at the moment. Maybe around Silverstone they'll be okay. In terms of Oscar, I don't know. He's still turning in just even wider than Lando and not looking particularly. I don't think he looks great in the car at the moment. Body language.
Hopefully he'll get back to his brilliant
best.
Yeah,
I hope so. I mean, he was one of my. I really thought he'd do well this year, and I'm just, Japan aside, he's never looked very confident.
Maybe he's had enough of the McLaren favouritism, and as is rumoured, he'll be in a Red Bull next year potentially. Peter,
really? I mean, that
some say.
I mean, if Max is leaving and they replace him with Oscar, I don't think that's like for a start, and that would be a problem for Red Bull. Equally, I can't imagine if Max stays that there's room for Oscar there, because they've got more drivers than they need, haven't they? They've got, obviously Isaac's doing a great job, and then you got Soloff who's doing a good job as well. He'll probably find his way into a Red Bull, into a Racing Bulls next year.
Does that mean the end of Liam Lawson, do you think? As a Racing Bull.
Well, I can't imagine they get rid of Arvid, because what a job he's doing. He's absolutely superb, and he's another Isaac Hadjar type early turn-in driver, Kimi Antonelli type driver. He's doing it all naturally. Very good head on his shoulders. Really good to watch. Love watching him drive.
He's not half
Nice
bad.
guy too. Very nice guy.
As you round third then, Peter, let me ask you finally about Scuderia Ferrari. You said that ADO was a nonsense, but myself included, I thought that this ADO is going to be a meaningful upgrade to Scuderia Ferrari. Again, they went so well last time out at Barcelona. How could you not think that they were going to challenge Mercedes for the rest of the championship? And then, much to my disappointment, it looks like they're almost slower relatively as versus Mercedes. And to boot, it seems like Charles Leclerc has forgotten who he is entirely. What do you make of the Scuderia Ferrari circumstance, Peter? Do you think they can get back to where they once upon a time, 2007, 2008 were this year?
Well, my observations in Austria were actually the engine was quite good. And I think they have benefited from a slight upgrade or an upgrade on the power unit on the ICE side. And I think the engine was quite good. But the chassis was not good. And that showed up on Friday in terms of, in the heat anyway. We got to bring that in. The heat was oppressive, obviously. But the minute they put fuel in the car on Friday, the deg was just out the window. It was ridiculous. And they never really got on top of that. And I think a lot of what you saw in terms of their top speeds, acceleration, was then colored by having to set up the car in order to try to survive with a heavier fuel load. And that's what we saw. That's the Ferrari that we saw Saturday and Sunday. Saturday, it was good enough to get them on the second row of the grid. So let's not be too negative about them. But right now, they've been overtaken quite considerably by Red Bull in terms of time management on heavy fuel load, number one. Two, grip level, I would think, is probably pretty similar, but balance, Red Bull seem to have got a better fix on balance of the car relative to harvesting the power and deploying the power the way you have to into corners. Now, Lewis is doing a better job than Charles with that. And that's one of the reasons I think that Charles is still struggling, because he can't balance the necessary straitjacket of harnessing power and deploying the power with the way Charles wants to drive that specific car. That doesn't apply to Kimi at Mercedes, because the Mercedes has got a much bigger sweet spot. And Max, to his credit, I think has done a very good job with the Red Bull engineers to come up with a really nice compromise, which Isaac is kind of on the back of. But you can see it's pretty small footprint, because Isaac's still making quite a lot of errors with his driving, but he's really quick and doing a great job. But Max has found this balance. And I think it came to the surface most obviously in Austria when they said first gear for turn 3, Max. In the same way, remember everyone was going on about how at turn 10 in Bahrain in the test, it wasn't at Mega how Max was going back to first and getting more engine power and all the rest of it. Well, guess what Max said? He said, nah, just doesn't feel right. I want to take turn 3 in second. It's much better to settle the car. I want to be much more on top of the car in terms of getting the power down smoothly. And that's what he did. Okay, when it was push comes to shove, particularly heavy fuel, he was first gear in the race. But when it was doing the lap, on soft tires, empty fuel, second gear, thank you very much. And the only other driver to copy that was Arvid Lindblad. Oh. Really impressive to see that. And that just shows Max's, and that's something Charles is not doing at Ferrari. I think that's my ultimate point. And now whether it's because the Ferrari won't let him do that, or because he doesn't have quite the finesse of Max to be able to, no, let me rephrase that. Because they all harvest and deploy the power differently, one power unit to another, maybe that's something that you could never do in a Ferrari. Maybe that's why Charles was always using first at turn 3, because the back end just doesn't allow him to do that, which suggests, it goes back to my point, I think Red Bull have got more inherent efficient downforce now than Ferrari. And that just shows, A, in the way the tire deg works, and B, in what Max is now doing with the car that Charles is not. That may also be because Max is more creative and has a better relationship with the engineers and can get his point over in a clear way. And they're so used to working with Max in a way that Charles can't, because on the other side of the garage, you got Lewis potentially saying something completely different because he's driving the car differently. And that's the problem Charles has. At Red Bull, that doesn't exist for Max, because if Max says, no, I want to run this rear stiffness, I want this at the back, and I want to feel this as I'm going into the corner, and I want to be able to use second at turn 3. The engineers don't fight it. They say, okay, we'll make it work. But imagine if Charles said that at Ferrari.
And I mean,
well, it's working for Lewis. Why do you want to change? That would be the response.
And this is variable change, isn't it, Peter? Because last year they would have, of course, had to listen to Charles Leclerc. 86 points down the road is what he ended up in the driver's standing.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you might argue as to why Ferrari don't make Lewis the de facto number 1, given his...
Well, they don't need to, because they're doing okay as they are. I mean, they don't need a number 1 at Ferrari, because it implies that then there'll be a number 2, and Ferrari would never want to go down that road anymore. But I think it just shows, personally, I think it just shows how it's wrong for Charles then to clutch at the nearest possible variable, which might be brakes, and say, oh, well, Lewis has got these brakes, I'll put these brakes on my car. And as I've said it several times now, personally, and you may well say, well, what will Windsor know about it? But I personally don't think that's the solution. And I think Charles is going down a blind alley if he thinks it is. Because what he's going to have to do to get the carbon industry friction material to work as Lewis is working it, he's going to have to drive like Lewis. And he's never going to do that. So he might as well stay with Brembos. And let's face it, they're not exactly terrible on the Red Bull, are they? No. And he might as well race with Brembos and just be Charles Leclerc and get the best of the car as the way Max is. Probably if you probably put carbon industry friction material on a Red Bull, it probably would have more stopping power and certain heat conditions. But Max likes the feel of the Brembos, and I think Charles loves the feel of the Brembos, to be honest. He's just trying to convince himself that he doesn't.
Oh, Mr. Windsor, it's going to be interesting. It will be interesting, and I'm keen to see how this season plays out.
Well, I think if I can just interrupt, because one thing I want to take on, because we were talking about Oscar and how things, there is a parallel to how well Kimi's going compared with how well Oscar went last year, and then it all started to change and went towards Lando. Will the same thing happen at Mercedes now that George has won Austria? I think the main point to consider is that Mercedes are a very different team to McLaren. And if any team has the ability to run 2 great racing cars, by which I mean the driver in the car as well, it's Mercedes. And I don't think that we should just assume that now George has won Austria, that Kimi's just going to fade away and George is going to blitz the championship in the same way that effectively it kind of happened for Lando. So, I think it's going to be, as you say, I can't think of the right adjective. Fascinating isn't enough, really, to describe what's going to happen in the remaining races of the year between George and Kimi, and how good that's going to be, actually, and how the standards of driving we're going to see from both of them. And don't get me wrong, I mean, George is super, super quick in his own way.
Yeah. Good luck, George. I think you're going to need it, mate. Nico Rosberg 2016 season incoming. I think he'll need to be that level of committed to get it done over this.
Isn't Nico the guy said recently that it'd be a massive mistake for Isaac Hadjar to go to Red Bull?
Yeah.
Didn't he say that?
Yeah. Full of knowledge and hot takes is Nico. Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as per usual. I appreciate these conversations more than you might realise.
I do too, Cameron. It's always great to wake up on a Monday morning to your smiling face.
Oh, I appreciate you, Mr. Windsor. Far too kind, as per usual. And if you call yourself an F1 fan and you are not subscribed to the Peter Windsor YouTube channel already, then what are you doing with your life? F1 card and wheel knowledge card instantly revoked. Go and do that now. Shortly thereafterwards, the pick to click on your favourite podcasting platform is the Short Corners podcast. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, like, comment, subscribe, like, hype, comment and subscribe. Listening, 5 stars. I appreciate each and every single one of you. To the moon and back. Between now and next line, remember to look but never stare.